Kate has launched a brand successfully through TikTok. And the primary focus of this conversation is to learn how she did that, and also primarily to pull out advice and strategies that worked for her to not only go viral on TikTok, but to sell and create a brand, a product through TikTok, Instagram, and other social channels. Kate is absolutely crushing it. And if we're talking about brands that are succeeding in the newest ways in commerce today, Kate is a perfect example of that. So let's jump in and see what Kate has to say.
Our first product is it's essentially a diaper-shaped heating pad, and it's been sort of an idea that I've had for a long time. But for so many years was like, I'm not launching a diaper-shaped heating pad. Like, that's not gonna be my first e-commerce product. That's so dumb. But after some PickFu polls and one viral post of a prototype on TikTok, it kind of just happened. So the idea, Reb, is kind of based in this growing issue of endometriosis, adenomyosis, PCOS in the US. And I just don't think that there's enough relief out there. I've experienced it myself. And so this is our first product of many ideas, probably more outrageous to come.
What was your launch like for this product?
Smooth with no issues.
For sure. Yeah, of course.
So in July of 2024, I posted a video with my prototype on TikTok, and it blew up, got like 1.2 million views in a week. And that was the moment that I decided to go all in. Before that, I'd gone to a couple of Alibaba manufacturers and tried to get some samples, and they literally didn't even turn on. And I just was so discouraged up to that point. So I sewed one together, posted it on the internet, and then one of my colleagues was like, you need to collect emails from that video, because if you do nothing, you're going to have nothing. You're not going to have anybody to communicate with. Like, this is just going to kind of fizzle out and not turn into anything. So I started collecting emails before I had a product. And that's when I went to, a branding expert. I got my URL. I got the funnels all set up and ready to go. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gemba.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So went to Gemba and said, take all my money. I don't care how much, like, just get this. I want to get it from here to here. Cause I know now, I at least had that assurance at that moment that I had a customer base. And that was kind of what was holding me back before, was the validation, the market validation. So went to Gemba. It took them, July until, I had my first working final sample in November. It took them a few months, but along the way, they were sending me products that I could use to promote it and take pictures of it. And that's when I decided to launch a Kickstarter. So on October 1st, I was going to launch a Kickstarter. I set the listing up maybe a week in advance of that. 3 days before the planned launch date, I put ad dollars behind it. I'd been promoting it. I had this whole party planned. 3 days before it launched, we got an email saying that this is not compliant with our rules. It claims to cure a disease. You can't run this Kickstarter campaign. And it's not even that you can't reapply. Like, we're never banned. So it's like, wow, okay, cool.
What? There's no 3-strike system here. It's just one and you're out.
It's crazy. Yeah. And so at that point, I was already like, we already had the momentum. So Liron Hirschkorn, actually, we were frantically on Shopify's app marketplace looking for anything similar to Kickstarter. And we found something called pre-product. At that point, I had my storefront ready to go, and we installed pre-product so that most of the apps on Shopify don't collect money up front. And that's what I needed, was capital to get things going and buy inventory. But this one did. This one had the option, as long as you gave like a date for shipping. And so we installed pre-product and launched. In the first 24 hours, I got 200 pre-orders. My list was at 3,500 people, I think, before this.
Wow.
And so I got 200 pre-orders, and just over time, just since then, I sent it to a couple different influencers and
Yep.
we reached 1,500 pre-orders. So half of my stock right now is sold to pre-orders.
Wow. And that's all capital that you can,
Yeah, leverage.
invest and build.
Exactly. Yeah. Which has been really exciting. So yeah, that was our biggest hiccup, really. But I mean, I know that that's going to just be part of the process. I was actually kind of excited that was my first sort of entrepreneurial.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, the scramble, the trying to figure out a solution, like the late nights, like that's all a part of it. I love it.
Yeah, it was fun.
I think so. It's good to have context for like kind of how things came to be, and there's definitely much more. But I want to focus on like kind of the aspect of the focus of content here. So let's jump back to like TikTok. Let's jump into like an evaluation of maybe an evaluation of yourself for like, okay, what content has worked and what did not. Looking at like the TikToks and also other platforms, content that did very, very well. What common themes do you think are present for those pieces of content?
Yeah, so I wish this wasn't the answer to this question, but every single time that I've gone viral so far, it's been hook text over B-roll. So something that speaks to my audience, usually it has the word endometriosis in it, but something that speaks to my audience that's legible, and outside of sort of those safe zones on TikTok and Instagram where all the buttons overlap.
Yes.
With me demonstrating the product or doing something with some sort of a sound that's either humorous or emotional or whatever, that tends to just do really well for me, even though there's so many other options. But yeah, that's been the most frustrating part is like, I have this idea, it's going to do so well, and I put so much work into it. And then it's like hook text B-roll works every time.
Yeah, that's so interesting. What about the hook? Like, so the hook specifically is kind of, well, obviously there's some visual elements there, but it's a quick communication of like endometriosis, like that's the subject matter.
Yeah.
And like something going on in the background to display like, okay, there's something going on here that interests me.
Yeah.
What's a piece of content that didn't work that you thought was going to work?
Oh gosh. I just posted one the other day. It was really dumb because I keep thinking like I'm gonna be really weird and people are gonna be like, yeah, I'm like outright, and then like 2 people like it and I'm like, whoa, I saw that, and it's just out there. So, and I did a bunch of editing to this one where I was like dancing weird, and it was a kind of a sarcastic joke about people thinking that female founders aren't as equipped to like run a business, and
Interesting.
flopped. It was so bad. Yeah. That's the one that didn't do well, and it probably just because it just didn't make sense. But I was like, I'm gonna leave it there because it's authentic and I believe Disney. I'm not scared.
Oh my gosh. No, I love Goose going for it. Like how much would you say, I'd imagine a question in people's minds is like, okay, what should I post? How often should I post? How often are you posting for Reb Relief?
Radically.
Just whatever.
I'm very much adhering to the idea that quality matters more than quantity because I've tested both. I've tested consistent posting and I've seen audience fatigue over time in other accounts that I ran. And it's just, there are certain niches and topics that you can just continue to kind of knock on the door and post consistently and you start to get really good traction. But I think just with the way that my business exists right now, the amount of capacity that I have to put into making TikToks, I'm much more focused on quality.
Yeah.
With the exception of that one video, but like, yeah, it's so sporadic. There's no real consistency to it right now. I wish it was different though.
Yeah. Well, but there's an element here that I think that there's kind of like this shift. This is broader than content in general, but like there is kind of almost a shift away from hustle culture right now. Like this is just not, I don't want to speak like, oh, there's a majority of people, but like there's an interesting shift happening where like not hustling is kind of like the luxury, time is like the luxury, relaxation space is the luxury, right? And I think that the quality aspect or like, it seems like you're creating content when an idea comes to mind. And it seems like that does very well.
Yeah, I think the energy, I think that question comes up in my mind too often where I'm like, when are you going to put that strategy together? When are you going to start focusing on that consistency? But my energy is way more focused on keeping myself open to those ideas. Cause the concept where ideas have you have to stay in that zone of like, I think those ideas are going to come to you and you're going to have all sorts of inspiration and then have the energy to act on them and, bring them into reality. But
Yeah.
I think creating a life that people actually want to see is going to take your content so much further than someone who's got, dark circles around their eye and they're just like posting every few hours and responding to every comment. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
More authentic, I think.
And that's what part of this session is figuring out the exact strategy for like a playbook for TikTok, right? But more than that, I think it's probably adopting them at like what's the mentality for you? What's your mentality and what's the mentality behind your successful operation? And so this is really interesting to unpack. There's an interesting this is a technical aspect, and I'm curious if you can speak to this as well. Have you noticed any specific differences between like posting content on TikTok versus like Instagram or like other platforms?
No, but the translation to sales is very different from platform to platform, specifically because Instagram is a lot more lax with the automations and the tools that they allow. So, for example, first of all, I know Instagram in the last couple of weeks is definitely going to push my content more. I've gotten way more views on Instagram than I have on TikTok in just the last 2 weeks. But second, I know that if I'm going to post something, one of my favorite strategies is comment this word and I'll DM you a discount code. When a post goes viral, that doesn't scale. I can't keep up with that. And so I use ManyChat. I think there's probably other tools, but ManyChat so far for me has worked really well. And not only does that boost the post, it makes, the engagement metrics much more favorable, but then that translates directly to sales from Instagram. Can't do the same thing in TikTok. And so I think technically my strategy on TikTok is a lot more like shoot from the hip, just use the ideas that come. With Instagram, I think sometimes I shy away from showing as much as I do on TikTok just because the audience is just slightly older, maybe a different mindset. Contextually, the other kinds of content they're going to see is maybe either, a couple weeks old or it's, I don't know, just like, it's just a different vibe. So that's the biggest technical difference between the two platforms, I think. But I did see that there was something around like Instagram Shop recently that was just, I don't know how different that is from what they've had before, but I'm curious to see how that performs against TikTok Shop.
Yeah. Me too. It's interesting to see. I mean, again, like a lot of it comes down to how both platforms display content and the audiences too. You're right. The audiences are very different. Let's think it is just a different vibe. And if you're not or haven't been on TikTok, then it's hard to kind of grasp that. But going from Reels to TikTok, you just kind of know the difference between like people commenting, people who are engaging. There is a difference there. So I think a good kind of natural progression past this point is like trying to unpack how like talk to me about audience building, right? So a lot of sellers are concerned about like, okay, I can go viral maybe, or like, oh, hypothetically, if I go viral, that's great. But like, how does that actually translate to building an audience? And then, of course, like building sales, which you talked about as well. How have you approached content creation, embracing these platforms like TikTok and Instagram, and also like building your organic audience specifically?
Yeah, there's 3 buckets. So the majority of the videos that I'm posting are in the awareness bucket, which is just like, I'm just trying to connect with this audience, trying to show them, have you heard the phrase, you are the niche?
Yeah. Yes.
Trying to show them what niche they're in, sort of this is the person you're engaging with, the brand that's coming from that and all this stuff. So the awareness stuff is one bucket. Then email collection is the second bucket. That's one that I've only gotten right a couple times. That one's really tricky.
Yeah.
And then the other bucket is conversion. So that's when I post a code or I work with an influencer or do something there. That helps me sort of figure out, if I'm feeling a lot of anxiety around the email list and I want to send out the newsletter and I want it to be growing or I'm not hitting a metric. I know that anxiety can be resolved through these kinds of post this kind of content, or I just need to allocate more time to one of the 3 buckets. We just put an email collection thing on the website for it's different now than it was back in October. But it hasn't really been established for a while. And so that's something that I'm sort of feeling. We've got, I think, 100,000 visitors just in the last few months that are not a large enough percentage of that number is not converted to email subscriber yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the 3 buckets. But yeah, I think I'm just confessing like
No,
marketing right now.
so that's interesting. I mean, there is another interesting. Does your audience, is the age range like pretty broad? Is it a little bit younger?
Yeah, it's so sweet too, because I get emails all the time from moms of teenagers who are just starting their first period, and they're like, the mom is just doesn't beside herself, doesn't know how to help her daughter, or partners who are like, my wife, I need this from my wife. Explain to me what this, how this would work. It's so sweet.
Very sweet.
But yeah, the audience. Sorry, what was your question? It was my thought.
It's if it skews like a little bit younger, or if it's just kind of all over the place.
Oh yeah, it's all over the place. But
I was gonna say, like, because email, it's just interesting that email, like, there are 3 buckets, and those 3 buckets are very useful. But email is still like a very important aspect of this.
I know, it's horrible.
Yeah, it is.
Email. I wish everybody would just like move to texting or social media DMs. One of the 2, like even professionally, if you DM me on Instagram and I'm like, oh crap, I need to get to that project, or so much, I don't know why, just with an email, it's so overwhelming. There's so many words. I don't know.
No, it's like a necessary evil at this point.
Right.
But the connection with, like, it's a connection of social media to email. That is it's a little bit of a rough, like, there's a little bit of a rough transition there.
Yeah.
Like, just getting people from social to email. And it sounds like the buckets you have in place are also, like, you have email there, but it sounds like you have a couple of other things as well to kind of mitigate.
Yeah, but now that you say that too, that's interesting, because I get so much more personal engagement from customers via email than I do in DMs. I get the occasional DM where this is my situation, this is what I've experienced, but in email, I've got novels from customers talking about how, like, this is my journey with endometriosis. This is how many surgeries I've had. Like, here are pictures of my surgery. And it's like, I love that. I love that because it's so validating to know that I'm not alone, and then I get to do the same for them. But
that's great.
It is so different. It's a lot more, the word. Yeah. There's a lot more, I think, maybe emotional safety in email.
Yeah. That's interesting. And that's something important to take note of as well. How do you think people should get started creating content?
Okay, so I want that piece of advice about this came from Joe Rogan, but I know it's a little controversial, but it's really good advice. So he said, you are the niche. So you're not trying to identify what topics or what content or what to talk about. It's so much more of a personal understanding of what interests you and what makes you glow and what makes you, vibrate high, I think.
Yeah.
And I think finding that authenticity, and they say that the highest vibration is authenticity. And so when you walk into a room and you're vibrating authentically, like, people are going to be drawn to you. And so making sure that exists and understanding that deeply is the first step. And then one big trend right now, specifically on TikTok, is this sort of founder-led strategy where we've got, Strawberry Milk Mob is a good example of that,
Yep.
where she's just like, these are reason number 47 why I love men, or reason 35 or whatever. She has that kind of ongoing content, but she's moved into this really cool space where she's kind of teaching as she goes. And one of the principles about learning something is the fastest way to learn it is not visually, not kinesthetically, it's by teaching.
Yeah.
And so while you're going through this process, the best moment to capture is the moment that you're learning how it's working and how things are going. And so that's always been like my excuse for filming myself at my desk, or filming myself opening the box, or talking about the struggles authentically. Like, I think that if you combine those 2 things, who you are and the niche that you uniquely, nobody else in the world is going to be able to create that niche. If you combine that with a communication strategy of some sort to teach as you go. I think those two things are going to get you at least started in a really strong place. So
that's a pretty good mic drop. That's a pretty good thing to leave people with. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for talking about Reb and your experience, your authenticity, what's working, what's not. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm sure you got a lot to do. You got some Reb orders you got to fulfill, right?
Yeah, it's a matter of doing it.
Yeah.
Oh no.
So thank you, Kate. And if you want to follow you or follow Reb, like where would you like to point people to go?
Reb Relief on all major channels. And that's how I learned how to spell relief, was because I had to keep typing it in. Everything's REBRELIEF on all, like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook.
Okay. Kate, thanks again. Looking forward to more content. Until then, we'll see you next time.